Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome everyone to the Just Transition Subcommittee meeting for May 12th. It's really great to have everyone with us. Today feels like a pretty important kind of transition moment for Just Transition Subcommittee. We have some new subcommittee members joining us. We have some guest presenters. We have a full agenda and hopefully some public comment and participation as well. So I just wanted to welcome everyone, including our newest members to the subcommittee. We always do a tradition of entering our name and an area of gratitude in the chat. So please feel free to do that today. We are going to, as part of our welcome, hear from hopefully every subcommittee member directly with a bit of introduction from our new members and a wish from each existing member of one thing that you wish you'd known before you started on the Just Transition Subcommittee. So hoping that that'll be a way to sort of indoctrinate our newest Just Transition Subcommittee members and sort of share information back and forth. So that'll be part of our extended welcome today. Then we have a presentation of a kind of a human-centered design presentation from a group of Dartmouth students that are joining us around improving weatherization access in Vermont. We're really excited to have that student group with us and the discussion that we get to have as a result of what they're sharing. Then we'll do some council updates, have a public comment period, and then engage in a discussion that's sort of building upon the priorities that we discussed during our last subcommittee meeting, and really start to focus on where we move for the next few months and what capacity we feel members of this subcommittee have to engage in that work. So that's our agenda for this evening. Any questions or additions that anyone wants to make?
I wanted to just remind us or remember, I think we were going to actually give a little bit of time for our new members. Yeah. And one other item is that we are concerned that this could be the last meeting where Iris is joining us. And I don't know if that's true, but if it's true, Iris, we want to honor you and acknowledge how much you've been a huge part of this and the climate action plan. So I just wanted to put a pin in that one. We don't have to start with that, but I didn't want us to lose it.
Yeah, super important. Yeah, I think that's a great piece to include. Before we move to introductions, let's just do a quick acceptance and review, or review and acceptance of the minutes from our April 21st meeting. Any additions or comments that people have on the minutes that were shared? Great. Okay, so I think as always, we accept no comment as acceptance, which is wonderful. So yeah, so now is our sort of welcome and transition moment. We'd love to hear from each of our 6 new, well, actually not all of our newest subcommittee members are able to join today, but for the newest subcommittee members that are able to be here today, we'd love for you to do a brief introduction of yourself, a bit of your background, a bit of kind of your interest and engagement in the Just Transition Subcommittee. We will have an opportunity for a lengthier, more engaged introduction and opportunity to meet each of you in this virtual world at future meetings. So still aiming to keep these introductions relatively brief so that we can stay on track with our full agenda. And then again, as a way for you to get to meet the rest of the Just Transition Subcommittee, each member will introduce themselves and share a little bit about kind of their learned lessons or words of wisdom from having worked in the group for the past bit. So, and then this, Iris, is our chance to hear from you about what's next for you. So newest members, I'm going to open it up for you to say hello and introduce yourselves to the rest of the Just Transition group. if you're willing.
Maybe it might help to call on Sebi first. How's that?
I'm willing, but I'm hopeful that I can hit the sweet spot in terms of a brief introduction with enough background. Hi, I'm really glad to be here and honored to be with this group. I really have appreciated all the work that you've done and the rest of the Climate Council has done thus far. My name is Sebi Wu. I am currently my day job as the climate and equity advocate at the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, and I hope I'm not lagging. Can I get a thumbs up if I am okay? Okay, thank you, Abby, I saw you. VPIRG is a nonprofit environmental consumer protection and pro-democracy advocacy nonprofit with tens of thousands of members across the state, which we get in large part from going door to door across the state. And until 2019, that was every single town. And then 2020, of course, was somewhat remote in terms of our public outreach. But we're building back, and actually folks are going door to door, so that's great. Most recently, I've been working to support the Environmental Justice Bill, which I know is a recommendation of the Climate Council, which passed with strong supermajorities in both the House and Senate and should be on the governor's desk, as well as a mix of other issues this session. Most relevant for this group is the Clean Heat Standard, which VPIRG supported. Unfortunately, in the eyes of climate progress, successfully vetoed by the governor, and a thermal energy charter change that passed that allows Burlington to have more tools to get to net zero, hopefully by 2030, which is the city's goal. Sorry, I'm going a little bit beyond introducing myself, but it is sort of my background in this work. I started with VPIRG in 2017, between my second and third year at the University of Vermont. I graduated with a degree in political science and minors in Spanish and community and international development. Let's see, I grew up around Vermont. I spent my first couple years in Cornish across the border in the Upper Valley, and then lived in Hyde Park and Morrisville, then Elmore, and then in Lamoille County, and then down to Windham. I spent most of my adolescence in Saxons River in Windham County, and now I'm back up here in Chittenden County, where I used to come for first night, and it's the big city. And my parents actually my dad lives up in Newport in Orleans, and my mom on Scottney in West Windsor in Windsor County. So I've explored a good amount of the state. I love it. And I think that is probably good for now. I guess just to put a finer point on it, most of my professional career has been at VPIRG on environmental campaigns, whether door to door or organizing with Youth Lobby and other partners, including Iris, sad to see you go, or advocacy in the State House. I've also worked in housekeeping and food service, including at the food truck at the Vermont Country Store in Rockingham, which was a lot of fun, but I don't miss the sweatiness. At 25 years old, depending on who you ask, I'm either an elder Gen Z or a baby millennial. And I am acutely aware that the status quo on climate and so much more is deeply unjust. And so locally and globally. And so I'm kind of coming at this work from that perspective, looking ahead to a long career, hopefully, of trying to do better and help our world do better on climate and so much more. So I've probably rambled on long enough, but it's really nice to see your faces and be in the Zoom room with you all.
Thank you, Sebi. It is wonderful to meet you. I would say you were pretty on the higher end of brief, but I appreciate all the background and all that you're sharing. And I think that, again, we all really want to dig in and have greater opportunity to hear more about kind of each of yours background and contributions. So thank you. It's wonderful. I'm happy to call people out, but I'm also, thanks for volunteering. We'd love to hear you.
Yeah, because I'm happy to go on the shorter end of the spectrum as far as introductions go, so I can balance Mr. Wu. My name is Anna Gunther. I live in White River Junction. I work for Vital Communities, a local nonprofit that serves the Upper Valley region of Vermont, New Hampshire. I moved up to the Upper Valley from Savannah, Georgia, my home, in 2004, and went to Dartmouth. Did not love it, but I did love Vermont. Fell a total love with Vermont, and I've been living here since. My work with Vital Communities involves transportation and energy efficiency projects, transportation, mostly e-bikes, and energy efficiency. Most recently, I worked on an energy burden project, low income targeted mobile home outreach. I can is the quickest summary I can give there. And I organize with the White River Junction Pride group, and I'm happy to be here.
Good to meet you, Anna. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jenna Hirschman. I can go next. I'm a sophomore at Essex High School, so another youth member for the Just Transitions Subcommittee. I'm a student member of Youth Lobby, which is an environmental, mainly advocacy group, youth advocacy group. We recently hosted Rally for the Planet, which was very successful. There was a bunch of organizations there. I'm also a member of Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network, which is another youth group working on mostly educational advocacy, like anti-racist education. I'm really passionate about environmental work and as well as anti-racism and other equity work. And so this is a place that I very much work with. I'm really excited to be here and learn more from everyone here. Thank you.
Anna, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you. All right, Indra and Trace, it's up to the two of you. All right, Indra's off.
I unmuted, so I'm gonna go next. Indra, he, him. I live in Essex Junction. What I do really depends on the day and time because I'm a freelancer. So it really depends on the project that I'm running at a time. But when I'm not doing that, my regular job is I coach graduate students on policy, advocacy, leadership, that kind of stuff. I am not an expert or a lot of background in climate issue, but I do believe that people who are not at the table, generally not invited at the table, must have a share of the table, not only get invited, but should have a share. And that comes from my own lived experience and multiple facets of my identities, which we don't have to dig deeper into now. Excited to be here. I was a part of organizing, listening to Low and Moderate Income Vermonter, which was exciting, with Casca, Amanda, Sue, and great to be a part of this team.
Wonderful to have you, Indra. Thank you.
Sorry, as soon as I unmuted, my dog just like body checked the door. He's feeling grumpy, sorry. My name's Chase. I am based in Burlington. I grew up in Maine, born and raised, working class home in a rural part of the state. I moved to Vermont to go to the University of Vermont. After college, I became a public school teacher. I taught earth sciences in a public school on the US-Mexico border on the US side, right on the Rio Bravo. Did that for a handful of years, was a teacher in Houston, in Sharpstown, Houston for a little while. And then moved to Washington, DC, where I mostly worked in human rights, mostly issues based in sub-Saharan African nations, impacting reproductive rights, access to education for young women and girls. And now I'm an attorney and I primarily focus on clean energy and climate change matters across New England with a primary focus here in Vermont. So I'm really excited to be here and it's great to see you all. So thanks for the invitation and an opportunity to participate with this great team.
Thank you, Chase. It's wonderful to have you join us and to meet you. And then we have Liz, who's not able to be here tonight, who's our sixth newest member, and Liz will do a brief introduction when they're able to join us at our next meeting or the following, or maybe even later today if she's able to make it on. So now's our opportunity, I think, to just do brief introductions from each of the remaining subcommittee members and staff and offer kind of a bit of support for something that you've learned or gained or feel could be valuable to our newest members. And I'm happy to call people to help that move along more quickly. And Iris, I wanted to know if you'd be willing to go first.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Iris Strong. I'm currently the youth member on the Vermont Climate Council, but I am on my way off. So I am also just sort of passing right by the new members, because I think that also means that I am stepping off of this subcommittee as you all and cease your work for the summer and look to start back up in the fall. But it's really nice to meet all of you. And see all of you. I know some of you, and I'm really excited that you're gonna be part of this subcommittee, because I think we're doing really good work. And I think one of the things you were supposed to say was advice for new members. And I think that one of the things I think is really important for people to understand is the role of just transitions within the Climate Council structure, and the ways that I think it's important to understand the ways that power is not necessarily centered in this subcommittee, and the ways that we can work with other subcommittees to sort of affect the policies that are happening throughout the council, because I think that's something that maybe we missed a little bit in the past year. But I'm really excited for what's going next for me. I'm heading off to college, which is why I'm stepping down, and I'm going to be in New York next year studying environmental science and human rights at Columbia, and I will be coming back for the summers and coming back after I'm done to sort of share in this work after, but I'm excited for where that's going to take me. So yeah, thank you all, and it's really nice to meet you all.
Iris, how exciting. I'm so excited to hear what you're doing next, and certainly you can continue to be engaged in the work here in Vermont, either while you're at school and when you come back. So thanks for all your contributions and all the insights that you provided so many of us over the last year. So I know that we have others that are either members of the public or part of our Dartmouth visiting team. So I just want to make sure that it's clear who's subcommittee members and staff. So I wonder if just for the next few minutes, if you're not a member of the subcommittee or a staff, you'd be willing to just turn your video off just for a few minutes, and then please turn them back on, just so that everyone's clear about who our group is here today from the subcommittee. It's just helpful for a few minutes. Thank you. So I'm going to keep calling people out to ask you to do the brief introduction and your one recommendation or word of wisdom. So Danielle, you're the next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Danielle Bombardier. I am a union electrician and currently a high school building trades instructor. I'm here as a member of the Vermont State Labor Council, which is the state labor federation for Vermont. We represent about 10,000 members, union members across Vermont. One thing I guess that I've learned being here is this expression, moving at the speed of trust, which I had never heard before, but I found really valuable because coming from the trades, I sort of had a get things done mentality, and being a part of this group, not only like making sure that we hear everyone's voice, but making sure that we get the message correct and clear before we move forward. Welcome to everyone. Thank you.
Jane, I have you next.
Hi, everyone. Jane Lazorchak. I work as the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and I sit within the Agency of Natural Resources. I've helped facilitate this process over the last year and a half. I think that I really appreciated what Danielle just mentioned about moving at the speed of trust. And I think that as we move into this next phase of implementation, I'm really hopeful that we will be able to carry forward the guiding principles in a way that feels true and equitable. That's been likely missing from some of us or feeling pushed aside as the imperative of advancing the climate action plan felt so near and dear as we marched towards December 1st. So I'm really excited to help work with all of you to carry that work forward and think about that even as we look to tonight's agenda and think about the priorities that you all want to see us carry forward in the coming months and years. And we look forward to helping support that. So thanks for letting us be here. It's a privilege to work with all of you.
Thanks, Claire.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire McElveny. I use she, her pronouns. I am staff support from the Department of Public Service, where I do a variety of things, but over the past year have been helping support our work, particularly in this area, coordinating work on the Comprehensive Energy Plan, which we were sort of developing in tandem with work on the Climate Action Plan. And now helping to think about how we continue to incorporate these principles and tools into our work at the department as we move forward and implementation and next steps. I was hoping you would call me later so I could think of my one piece of advice when I heard what everyone else had to say, but maybe I'll just pass on. When I joined the subcommittee, I joined sort of after the committee had started as a staff support. I didn't really know how I would interact with the space, and Sarah Phillips actually in a one-on-one call just encouraged me not to hold back, even if it was a new space and I didn't necessarily feel like I had all the expertise to bring to bear as other members did. And maybe that's not as big a deal for the new members who clearly are steeped in this work, but it just was really helpful in terms of jumping in and doing the work and contributing, but also learning at the same time. So give that to you, and thanks, Sarah, for giving that feedback to me.
Thanks. Carrie.
Hi, I'm Carrie Hingstenberg. I use she, her pronouns. I am staff support from the Agency of Natural Resources. I work in the Department of Environmental Conservation as the planning manager. So I manage all things strategic planning, performance accountability, all the things the DEC does for the EPA in exchange for the money they give us, along with overseeing our AmeriCorps program and our intern program. But the most exciting part of why I'm here is I'm also the environmental justice coordinator for the DEC. And I've been in that role since about 2018. Anyway, so my advice, I guess, is persistence and repetition, I think, are something you just have to get used to. Like, we all know on this committee, we're saying things that make sense and seem really intuitive, but it's challenging other people's way of thinking. So if like you write it down once, or you're at a meeting and you think people get it, like, people don't, it takes a long time for people to get it. Yeah, so that's all I want to say is just be patient, but be persistent, and, you know, don't get discouraged along the way, because, you know, at DEC, we're in it 4 years now. And like at year 4, I think we're cresting or moving way upwards.
Done. Thank you, Carrie. Kafka, I have you next.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And my name is Kashka Orlo. I use she, her pronouns. I was asked to be a part of Just Transition Subcommittee by somebody who I consider a mentor. And I had no idea what I was doing. I have several different jobs. I'm a sole parent. So I was asked to represent people of low income and people from marginalized communities, but mostly low-income Vermonters. I'm also a sole parent. I don't know if I just said that. And but I do have a degree in business, and I've never really done anything with climate. Obviously, it's something that's been near and dear to my heart. Being an immigrant and seeing the different ways that the movement of the migration of peoples due to climate, due to war, but due to climate change for the past few decades has been, something that I have been following quite closely. So this was a tremendous opportunity to be able to come on board with Just Transitions. But I came in, I also came in a little bit late, was asked to join a little bit late. So I wasn't sure. Can you guys hear me, by the way? My daughter's doing the dishes. I wasn't really sure what was happening. So I guess my piece of advice or advice, please ask questions. Feel free to reach out to me at any point. I'll put in my cell phone number. It's the easiest way to get in touch with me. And if you have any kinds of questions, like, what are we doing exactly? What is this? I had no idea that this was such a new concept, that this was everything. Just think of a seed. We are that seed. We haven't even sprouted yet. And the concept of Just Transitions, sadly, which I can't believe it is, but it's something new that people, I think Carrie was saying, people are just starting to kind of digest and get used to. And we need to be there to help hold their hands so that they are adhering to the guiding principles and all the things that Just Transitions has put forward through our meetings and through our core values and our beliefs. Anyway, welcome everybody, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Kashka. Kelly.
Hi, so I'm Kelly Klein. I am a member of the Climate Council representing the small business community. I use she, her pronouns. So my business is Grenfell Meadery and Havoc Mead. We're based in St. Albans, Vermont. And in addition to being on this subcommittee, I'm also on the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. So council, 2 different subcommittees, been to a lot of these meetings. And the biggest thing that I would say about this particular subcommittee is that I think Sue and Sarah, and now Abby's carrying that torch, now that Sarah stepped down as a co-chair, and we had other co-chairs, Kaya and oh help me.
Nadia.
Nadia, thank you. Oh my gosh, sorry Nadia. For a while, and they just did an amazing job of setting a tone of welcome and trying to help make it the best space for people to speak up and feel heard and feel safe. And I really, really appreciate the work that you've done. And so this is a space where people are absolutely, as Kashka said, please ask questions. No one's going to be upset. And sometimes going into these, it's a recorded meeting with the state of Vermont and all of this, it can be a little intimidating. It was for me at first, but I think this is a very welcoming group that would absolutely love to hear people's voices, and especially a diversity of voices. And there's an attitude of wanting to all work together towards a common goal and listen with compassion and moving at the speed of trust was mentioned earlier. I think that's a big part of it as well. Just we're all in this together, and we're all working in solidarity in a way that I really, really appreciate. And I think I commend all of the co-chairs for setting the tone, but also I think all the other subcommittee members helping to hold that space. So that would be I don't know if that's, I wish I knew when I started, but that's something that I have to say that I've been really happy about since I've been part of this committee.
Thanks, Kelly. Ross.
Good evening, everyone. Ross Mcdonald. I'm the Public Transit Program Manager, and work to get 400 vehicles out to provide 5 million trips a year. A lot of that work is with low income and elderly and people with disabilities, and we need to do better. So this organization, this committee, this process has really informed and helped our program at the state level. I'm one of your staff members, and one of my tasks is to coordinate all of our efforts within the agency. We have 2 or 3 other members who are part of other committees and working on other projects, and we meet regularly to ensure that we're bringing things forward and staying coordinated as best we can. The only thing I can say is that this has been a really great learning experience. I mentioned some of the policies, the approaches, but the learning so much about the principles, the rubric, and applying it to the program that I run has been invaluable. So that's something we're going to learn a lot, that's for sure. New members and old alike.
Thank you, Ross. Marion.
Hi everyone, Marion Woles. I'm the Global Warming Solutions Act coordinator with the Agency of Natural Resources. So I work closely with Jane in supporting the Climate Council and supporting you all in the work that you do. I've emailed with many of you. I'm looking forward to seeing you all at some new orientations in the next couple of weeks, and excited to be here with you all today. I think one piece of advice or one takeaway I would have over the past 16 months or so would be, we are all in this space together. It's been virtual and looks like it will continue to be virtual for a while. So I think go into this with a sense of humor, a bit of forgiveness, and a lot of compassion for each other. It's a lot of hard work. It's sometimes a little awkward in these virtual Zoom boxes, but we're all working towards the same goals, and a little sense of humor and forgiveness for each other goes a long way. So looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks, Marion. Sarah.
Thanks, Marion. Sarah Phillips. I'm the director at the State Office of Economic Opportunity. I'm a member, not staff support. I'm a member of the committee on behalf of my Commissioner Sean Brown for the Department of Children and Families, who sits on the Climate Council. And I was a co-chair, and thank you, Claire, for those kind words and the words of everyone else. I'm not sure I can add much more to it, honestly. It's been great. Looking back, it's been a real privilege to be a part of this group. And I guess since we're creating a welcoming space and people are going to lean in with their thoughts and their ears, maybe I'll just add that I think one of the things that has been really inspiring for me is, and I didn't think would happen necessarily coming in because of my own arrogance and privilege perhaps, is how challenged I felt by this work, even though it very much is connected to my day-to-day work at the Department for Children and Families in the Office of Economic Opportunity. But and I didn't think there was going to be so much new territory and new ground to cover, and how much there really was, and how much I was personally challenged. And opening myself up to that has been really rewarding. And then on the flip side of that, I would say to challenge others in a respectful and professional way in this space has also been equally rewarding, when members of this subcommittee have stepped forward with their voices to really challenge us all in conversation. Has been some of the most rich, rewarding conversations and movement that we've made on the issues at play. So I would add that into hopefully the trusting, welcoming space that we have created, and that will carry forward, that we can continue to offer each other that kind of challenge.
Sarah. Sue.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Minter. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of Capstone Community Action, which is an anti-poverty organization. And it has been a terrific experience to be a co-chair with many other revolving and evolving co-chairs. And I'm so happy Abby has joined me in that position now. I feel like I've learned so much. I don't know that it's advice to others, but it could be. But in particular about my privilege, and having been involved in policy development over really 2 decades in different capacities, what I've been learning, and I think what we're trying to grapple with, is how exclusive that process is, and what a bubble I have been living in and live in. And our challenge is to break the bubble down, the barriers down, and to create strategies to have real engagement from people who are deeply impacted and yet not at the table, to use Indra's metaphor. So for me, that is my education every day that we're together thinking a lot, and also every day at the work that I do, serving very low income and low and moderate income people in different ways. I guess my advice, as everyone else has said, is speak your truth. We will listen, but also patience, that we really have to realize this is very new for the sort of positions of power and the people in power that we're trying to educate and change, and structures and systemic disparity and inequality that we're trying to change. So it's a slow process and we're in it together. So that was my thought. Thank you, Abby.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Amanda, I know you have your video off, but do you want to introduce?
Yeah, hey, thanks. I misheard your original prompt. My name is Amanda Carlson, and I work with Sue at Capstone Community Action. I've been lucky enough to be a fly on the wall, excuse me, for these conversations the past year. I've mostly been acting as a scribe, but I don't really have any advice, but I'll just echo Ross and Sue's comments about it being a really worthwhile learning experience, and it's been really invaluable for how I can bring it to my everyday work and implement a lot of the things that we've developed on this subcommittee. So super appreciative to have been part of this work to date.
Give you such critical staff support to this work, Amanda, so thank you. Mona.
My name is Mona Tolba, and I work in many places. I work for the school district, for Burlington School District, as an call interpreter. I work also as an interpreter and translator for ALV. And hopefully, starting in 2 months, I accepted also a position with Department of Health. So what I am trying, to do, I think I am the last addition to this subcommittee. So I just also started, late, and I am learning as I go. When I joined, I did not have any clue what I'm putting myself in, but I had to learn so many things, and I am learning from each one of the people, that nice people in this group. I really like, to tell you that you need to be patient. Sometimes I have an accent, so if you don't understand any word that I said, please, ask me to repeat or to speak slowly. I speak very fast because sometimes I don't find the English word, the right one to say. So, but I really like, this being on this subcommittee, and my main goal is, to just bring my community voice to the table and to share their concern. Then they can do an informative decisions when they are putting policies and putting, laws and stuff like this. I hope, that, they will take into considerations, the underserved community, and in when they are making decisions. This is my goal. Thank you, and nice to see all of you.
Thank you, Mona. So grateful to have you. I didn't introduce myself yet. So I'm Abby Willard. I am the Director of Development for the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and started as a staff support for the Just Transition Subcommittee, and am sort of honored, humbled, and sometimes mortified at being co-chair along with Sue. My kind of words of advice, I guess, for our newest joining members, I think, in addition to all that others have shared, is that this subcommittee is really focused on process and public engagement and pieces that are so much embedded and carried through as a thread throughout all of the work of the Just Transition Subcommittee, and not necessarily always the subject matter expertise that happens in many of the other conversations and subcommittee members, but has an amazing value and staying power. And I'm just honored and so pleased to see the ongoing engagement and consideration for the Just Transitions conversations in this work. So much ahead, lots of opportunity and great challenge, and hopefully all that was shared demonstrates the culture of this subcommittee and the sense of the approach that we hope to take going forward. So welcome everyone, and best of luck, Iris, and thanks everyone for sharing your ideas and thoughts. So now to our Dartmouth students, please, thanks for being patient as we did our very lengthy introductions, and thanks for honoring turning your cameras off for a few moments. We're so grateful to have you here. And Carrie, I don't know, do you want to offer a quick introduction to our panelists?
Sure, I could do that. I met this team of Dartmouth students through Ginevra Wetmore at Sustainable Woodstock, who I know when she served in the Eco AmeriCorps program. So I met like really briefly with these students about their project, and they told me about what they were doing and that they really want to present it to an audience that, you know, can appreciate it because they're all getting ready to graduate, but they've worked really long and hard on it. And I said, sure, I will help you get in front of that audience. And then after that, they sent me their report. I hadn't even looked at their report, and I was just like so impressed when I saw it. I thought more people definitely need to see it. And I don't know, hear from these young people kind of approaching problem solving and environmental issues through a whole different lens than I've ever thought of it. So I think there's a lot to offer in the work that they're doing. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. I know you're like probably just finishing classes or tests, or maybe you've already left and graduated. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. And we have not graduated because Dartmouth goes until June, so we're still going strong. But yeah, I'll just share the screen to start presenting, and I guess we'll jump into it.
So yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for having us here today, and for the opportunity to present to you. So we're excited to present our work on improving weatherization access for low-income mobile homeowners in the southeastern Vermont area. So by way of introductions, we're a team of Dartmouth students with diverse backgrounds across human-centered design, cultural anthropology, cognitive science, math, and economics. And so for our outline today, we'll be going over some background around mobile homes and weatherization, our research methodology, some insights we pulled out, and ideas, as well as some steps moving forward. So our project is associated with the Dartmouth class called Senior Design Challenge. It's a 5-month capstone class, and we are currently in our 4th month. And in this class, students work with Upper Valley organizations, balancing design frameworks with the experience and knowledge of community experts to assist organizations and hopefully make a positive impact. So we are partnering with Sustainable Woodstock, a nonprofit organization, to connect with low-income Vermont mobile home homeowners to improve access to weatherization resources, and thereby reducing carbon emissions and the financial burden on homeowners. So first, would like to acknowledge that we are newcomers to this topic and that this position shapes our research and understandings. And we sought to fill out these gaps in our knowledge by prioritizing community voices as we work. So to briefly go over our process, which is built on the design thinking framework, first we build empathy through community conversations, and next brainstorm some ideas for impact, and then prototype and iterate based on community feedback. So our project focuses on people in mobile homes, and this is one of the most affordable housing options. However, they are most prone to heat loss because of the way they are built. Mobile homes consume 2 times more energy than site-built homes. And because of this, low-income households typically spend 16% of their income on energy, while other households spend around 4%. And due to this, low-income residents are 3 times more likely to go without heat. So low-income households carry a larger burden of energy costs, and more must be done to achieve energy justice. So next, we'll dive a bit deeper into how we built empathy.
So from January to March, we were focused on learning as much as we could about the space. As we approached our research, we went in with three main goals that shaped our interviews and the secondary sources we were looking at. So we really wanted to understand the weatherization process and its barriers, the roles and priorities of organizations involved and adjacent to weatherization, as well as residents' own motivations, concerns, and priorities. So we started off with some secondary research to get a better foothold on important background history like historical context, who mobile homeowners are, the weatherization process itself, as well as important local factors such as the existing resource networks. Then we moved into a 3-week period of gathering primary research, which consisted of 15 interviews with organizations related to weatherization, including Anna, who is here today. We interviewed Anna, and as well as mobile homeowners themselves. So these are all one-on-one, 45 minutes to an hour, and through phone or Zoom. So with the organization representatives, we really wanted to learn about the services offered and their approaches to weatherization and energy. With the mobile homeowners, we were looking for their lived experiences, their history with weatherization, and the motivations that led them to get weatherized. We also rounded out our research with one academic researcher who we wanted to learn more about his analysis of the weatherization landscape and the surrounding policy. One thing that's really important to acknowledge in our research is who we missed. So our resident interviewees were middle-aged to older, likely white, and all women, and they were recruited through sustainability organizations. What this means is that we probably missed people who have had bad weatherization experiences, don't have the time or energy to be interviewed due to pressing circumstances, and are far removed from weatherization services and related organizations. That being said, we did learn a lot of valuable things from the people we did talk to, and we employed several design thinking methods for synthesis. Our primary method for synthesizing interviews was affinity diagramming, or pulling out patterns and themes across interviews through grouping. We also compared and contrasted organizational mindsets and approaches through a series of 2x2 matrices, giving us a better understanding of cross-organization dynamics. Lastly, we also mapped the organizational network in this area, or the different paths that residents who are seeking weatherization services may go through in order to get to those services.
Yeah, so with all of those interviews and all of those synthesis, we were basically able to pull out important insights that we were able to use to inform how we can help with this issue. So first, from our interviews with organizations, we learned that they might have different goals, but they are complementary and provide residents with both short and long-term assistance. So the organizations we talked to basically seem to fall into two buckets. On one hand, you have the sustainability-oriented organizations that are focused on numbers and savings and efficiency and essentially like more long-term goals. But on the other hand, you have more community-centered organizations that have a lot of knowledge about their communities and neighbors and are able to offer like immediate financial support to low-income families who maybe in the moment might not be able to pay their energy bill, for example. And so a lot of sustainability initiatives fall into the category on the left and usually receive a lot of funding. But the in-depth community knowledge of these community-centered organizations on the right are really critical in achieving energy justice. And so an example of why these community-centered organizations' perspectives matter is that in speaking with residents, we learned that they really want to feel supported in a manner that encourages autonomy and respects their dignity. Because in general, residents are hesitant to ask for help. First of all, they might really want to be able to rely on themselves. One resident said, "I just hate asking people for help. My mom would say, I know I should be able to go out and do that myself, and that's just the way that I feel." Residents might also be embarrassed to admit that they need help, and there's also uncertainty whether you will even get the help that you're asking for. Residents also have a survival mindset, focusing on their most pressing needs, which understandably might not be weatherization. And so even after taking an initial step to ask for help, mobile home residents face other challenges. For example, many services and programs have long and intrusive applications. One resident talked about how they were asked to present their whole life story in one of them. These applications can be even made more difficult with language barriers or learning disabilities. And another barrier for weatherization is a resident desire for privacy. They might not want workers walking through their mobile homes during weatherization work. But one organization that helps combat all these barriers in seeking help is Cover Home Repair, which is a community-centered organization where volunteers assist low-income families with home repair and offer free weatherization services.
Their model provides residents with autonomy, dignity, and agency through programs like do-it-yourself weatherization. They offer a short and simple application process, and they focus on involving the homeowners in the projects themselves. Speaking to cover's effectiveness, for example, one resident said that they encouraged me to talk about myself, how this would affect me, and added small touches that made my house start to feel like home again. But we also learned that the services offered by Cover and SEFCA, which is the local implementation of the federal weatherization assistance programs, are unfortunately at capacity and currently can't serve everyone in the area in need. But as we've seen, they are effective in supporting residents in their autonomy. Something that's really important is that Cover and SEFCA can't really focus on outreach because their wait lists are so long and hands are so full. So marginalized communities who historically have already been unable to access resources remain underserved. But thankfully, there are facilitator organizations that are striving to reach these groups. We spoke with organizations who direct residents who are in need to weatherization with Cover and SEFCA, and we learned that they engage with hard to reach groups by developing personal connections and centering the residents' input at every step. For example, Vital Communities provides volunteers with the guidance and tools to reach out to low-income residents in need of services. And similarly, Rejoice relies on community liaisons to connect with underrepresented communities and understand their unique challenges. So there's always room for improvement, but there are organizations actively trying to funnel underserved communities to these free weatherization services.
So with these insights in mind, we began to brainstorm solutions. First, we held co-creation sessions where we brought our synthesis back to organizations to fill in the gaps with their long-term expertise. And then we began to brainstorm. We identified that our final deliverable should focus on one or both of these areas of impact. First, expanding the capacity of weatherization services to ensure more residents can be served. Or second, directing people who are most in need to these resources to promote equitable access. One idea was to create a network of compensated community liaisons who would connect the voices of mobile home parks directly to weatherization organizations. This idea was in part inspired by Rejoice's model. The second idea was to set up a phone line with an automatic voicemail with testimonials from people who had received weatherization services. This would be segmented into different parts of the process that callers could then choose from. And this format would enable homeowners to learn more about the weatherization process in a safe and private way from the direct experiences of their neighbors. Next, we sought to prototype and test these ideas. So first, we prototyped the weatherization phone line, and we wanted to specifically understand, does the prospect of weatherization testimonials add enough value to lead people to call the line? And second, will outreach with source testimonials help people better understand the process in the same way that organic word of mouth often does? First, to see if people would call in, we set up a phone line with a testimonial sourced from Cover Home Repair, distributed flyers at 2 local food banks, and left the phone line open for several days. To see how people reacted to this content, we went around to homes in Riverside Mobile Home Park asking for feedback. We spoke to 5 households plus our community contact, which may not seem like many, but unlike our first set of interviews, this was a quick prototype test with constraints of timing, community contact availability, and the desire to minimize our intrusion as outsiders. It's important to note that our partner has a contact in the Riverside Mobile Home Park in Woodstock, and he was the one who facilitated our visit by walking us around and introducing us to his neighbors. And in this way, he served as an informal community liaison. Without him, we quite literally could not have done this. Just to give you a bit of a better idea of what our testing process looked like, our community contact would knock on the door and introduce us. We would ask a couple of questions to get to know the person and understand their knowledge of weatherization. Then they would listen to the audio testimonial before we asked a couple of follow-up questions. And lastly, we would compensate them for their time. Despite our best efforts, there were still challenges in this testing process. So for one, we were only able to speak to a few households who had not already received weatherization services. In future testing, we would aim to reach more of these individuals. Next, we were likely perceived as outsiders, even with the help of our community liaison. We were also hesitant to take up too much of residents' time, even though casual conversation did clearly help to build rapport. And lastly, when distributing flyers, we did make an assumption that low-income mobile homeowners may frequent food shelves, which may or may not be true. But despite these challenges, we did glean many helpful insights from this experience, which we want to share. First, personal connections stood out to people when listening to the testimonials. Therefore, outreach from organizations should include testimonials that speak to residents' experiences and their homes beyond just the steps of the weatherization process. Next, there is a stigma around receiving free services, even within the mobile home park. However, emphasizing the active role of homeowners in the process could help to counter the stigma of free handouts. Next, families support one another in maintaining their homes. We saw this several times while we were visiting. So reaching out to one individual can spark a chain within their family. And lastly, door-to-door outreach without a community liaison is really quite difficult. These individuals have the opportunity to play a vital role in building relationships between residents and organizations.
So circling back to two main opportunities for impact we identified earlier. And so in directing people to weatherization access in an equitable manner, we're establishing trust with residents and centering their needs and empowering them through community liaison relationships that exist between organizations and mobile home parks. We are working to ensure that these liaison relationships are rooted in energy justice and pose no further burdens on residents. Next, in the area of expanding capacity for weatherization services, some recommendations we have include prioritizing the value of community-centered weatherization services, showing how valuable their work is, while also securing high-impact funding for accessible weatherization. Also, in terms of our methodology, we followed the design thinking framework in reaching out to various organizations like Cover, Vital Communities, Listen, and Rejoice, that are doing amazing work in engaging with marginalized communities. And we do recommend relying on their expertise and partnership with these community-centered organizations, as well as their regional counterparts, to better engage with people who are most often overlooked in sustainability development goals. So that's it. And thank you all for listening, and thank you to all the people who have helped contribute to our project thus far.
Getting some clapping signs from across the room. Thanks for sharing your project, especially in the middle of the end of your semester and ready for summer. Yeah, Amanda, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'd love to get a copy of this project because I work within a weatherization department in Central Vermont, kind of the counterpart to SEVCA, and then also separately, Capstone is working on some outreach efforts, and you guys had some really useful insights, so kudos.
Thank you. We'll have a more finished report at, I think, the end of this month, which includes like what we intend to pursue ourselves, as well as more of these insights in like much more detail. So we'd be happy to pass it along to the committee once we finish that.
Yeah, great. Sounds like there's definite interest. Kashka has her hand raised as well.
First of all, thank you so much for your work and for really, I mean, you're elevating all the things that we've been doing and we've been talking about. But I also wanted to ask if possibly this group would be interested in either doing another presentation of this sort or showing their findings to our task group, our Just Transitions task group, or in further going through and even getting a little bit more involved with what we're doing in the task group as far as outreach efforts, because a lot of this has just so many parallels, and I'm just overjoyed with the project that you guys did and with the work that you've done. This is really great work, and it is challenging, and it's you're just underlying everything that we've been talking about within Capstone and with Indra and Sue and Amanda and even on the task group. It's just really difficult. It's we need to build trust and we need to listen, and the liaisons and the compensation and everything. And I just want to say thank you. So I don't know if you would be interested in continuing this work with another task group, but let us know. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, as we
move forward with continuing to prototype what community liaisons might look like and all that, we would definitely love to chat more and learn more about the task group, because that's not an option we've explored yet. So, yeah.
I also wanted to add on that our project partner for this is Ginevra Wetmore from Sustainable Woodstock. So she has been meeting with us regularly and like guiding us. And she also went with us to the testing at the mobile home park. So even when we graduate, the way we're kind of arranging our handoff to her is so that she can continue working on these movements. So even when we're like graduated at the end of June, or sorry, like during June, she'll be able to continue the work.
And perhaps some of you will stay in Vermont, if not all.
Sarah, I see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't get it together to do the fake hand. Okay. Thank you, this was great. And when I introduced myself, for those who don't know what our office does, part of what we do is administer the low-income home weatherization assistance program in the state of Vermont through our partnership with 5 organizations, including SEVCA being one of them. So it was great presentation. Thank you. It's a lot to chew on and a lot of things we are chewing on. So your insights are really well timed for, I think, what the network is thinking about when it comes to equity and better reaching some of key communities that have been underserved by our program. I did want to add, and I added for the chat box, but for the recording and the people watching it, there's a lot of money coming to the low-income weatherization program. So while it may have been true at the point in time of the research that there was not enough capacity to meet demand, please don't let that stop you from calling your local weatherization office. Think you might be eligible. We are in the process of rapidly scaling up the program as quickly as possible, and it hasn't been the same historic wait list. So for the record, I wanted to get that in the recording. Thanks.
Sarah, on that, I'm curious, so with the investments in the weatherization programs, are resources going towards covering weatherization costs for homeowners, but also expanding staff capacity? What are the dollars being invested in Vermont?
Yeah, I will give the elevator version of that. And then there is some great testimony that we have provided to the legislature that I can, share some recorded link if people want to kind of go deeper into the plan for scaling up. But the Climate Council passed a plan that includes, frankly, more than tripling the size of the amount of weatherization that we're doing in the state of Vermont, really over the next short, very time window, between now and 2030, or even now. Anyway, I don't have it in front of me. I'm not getting the numbers right, but like really rapidly scaling up weatherization. And our program, the program for low-income Vermonters, really 80% of area median income and below, has traditionally represented about 50%. Yeah, Claire can give you the actual numbers of the plan, but really about 50% of the field and the weatherization effort in the state of Vermont. It's really the ability to scale up as quickly as the climate action plan calls for is really, really challenging, just to be frank. But we have the Climate Council recommended more money for weatherization. The governor recommended $80 million more for weatherization over the next few years. And the legislature passed it. And so it's very much, I think, gonna happen that we are gonna see a substantial increase in the amount of funds for weatherization, such that by the end of 2026, we expect that our program will have doubled in size in terms of how many homes we weatherize every year. So that means added staff, because our program provides funding to organizations who then hire staff who then go out and weatherize homes, right? So our program, the low-income weatherization program, doesn't provide incentives, so to speak. It goes out and, if you're eligible, does full, no-cost home weatherization, comprehensive weatherization services in people's homes at no cost, which is different than you hiring somebody and then getting the incentive covered by Efficiency Vermont, which is for moderate income and higher incomes in Vermont. So the answer to your question is yes, it involves hiring staff, but it involves hiring staff to do weatherization. And I expect that we're going to weatherize about 8,000 homes over the next 4 to 5 years.
Thanks, Sarah. And Claire?
My comment is actually on a different topic, and I don't know if you were going to comment on what Sarah was saying specifically, though. But I was going to say I'm not the department's weatherization expert, so I probably can't give you all the numbers. But I can certainly share this with my colleagues at the department who are. But on a related note, I was actually wondering, what I thought was really interesting was just the sort of the conceptual methodology used to approach the whole project. And since I don't work on weatherization, I was going to ask actually if when you share the final report, if you could pass along any sort of materials generally on human-centered design that you thought would be helpful, because I'm not working on weatherization, but I'm thinking about how we do public outreach and engagement and learn from communities differently. So that would also be really helpful.
Yeah, I think I can speak to elaborating a little bit more on what we presented today. So we presented that process overview of the circle of building empathy, brainstorming, prototyping, iterating. So generally design thinking is a very iterative process where once you have an idea, make a prototype, you always want feedback on it. And perhaps in industry wise, this feedback is a little bit more lopsided, like designer and testing user, and something that our specific senior capstone classes prioritizing is trying to make that more of a two-way street, having community feedback with communities also contributing ideas, where we give them enough space and power to say this is not what I need, and doing that community engagement right. The setup that we showed here of having more intensive, a little bit more ethnographic informed long form research in the beginning is pretty typical of the early stages of the process. And then as we mentioned with the prototyping, once we have ideas, it becomes more scrappy, a little bit more what can we get out there to answer our questions, the most pressing important questions, without spending a lot of time and money. I think a lot of the principle there is we don't want to spend too much time hiding away in our little college student bubble, making sure that we've got it perfect before releasing it out there. It's better to get it in front of people at a fidelity where they can put in their needs and inputs as well, and then we just cycle over until we hit a deadline and try to get it passed off to our partner who is working long term in this area, and set her up to be able to continue this work. But that's the spiel. But we have more in our project report as well.
Yeah, thank you for sharing a bit more and for asking the question, Claire, but of the approach that you used, it feels so relevant to so many of these efforts that I imagine will be outcomes of the Climate Council work. So thank you. There's a lot of comments in the chat about whether we can clip the recording that you already just provided as the presentation to us so that it could be shared. So maybe not needing to ask you to do the same piece again, but also acknowledging that the public participation task group of the Just Transition Subcommittee may really benefit from some of the approach and the design concept that you've engaged in your project. So Indra, you've had your hand up. I just want to make sure we welcome you.
Maybe this was not the scope of the research, but I always find the disconnect between recipient hesitant to ask for help because of the need for dignity and the respect, versus the service providers need to demonstrate the need because of the bureaucratic system that we have set up, right? So in your research, when you were speaking to organizational representative and 6 homeowners, was there any difference in what constitutes an effective outreach mechanism? Was there any difference in what they thought was the most effective way of reaching out to people and really supporting them? Did you find any differences, even if that was not the scope of the project? As researcher, when you're listening to them, was there any difference in what constitute to be the effective way of reaching out to people?
I guess I'll start off because with some of the methodology points, and then if anyone else wants to jump in. So one thing that we saw that definitely wasn't effective, as we mentioned, we did a flyer test where we were like, well, people call. Not effective, we got 1 call over 2 weeks. So making people take that extra step is definitely not the way to go about it. Some things we did to adjust during our prototype outreach is like, if you asked, would you get these services? A lot of people be like, oh, I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't want to be taking away from other people. But framing it as a sort of like, is there a family member or like someone you know that's close to you that might benefit from this? That was more effective in getting them to think like, oh yeah, perhaps there is someone that I can think of, and that also counts like as a person. And other things we saw, so having the community liaison was really important, because even with the community liaison, our group was very much, a lot of people were like, oh, are they trying to sell us something? Having the community liaison be like, you know, these are our neighbors, they want to hear what you have to say, and try to talk about something that is also good for the community, and kind of framing that in a two-way street was more effective. Although, as you can see, we only talked to 5 households, so kind of a mixed bag there. Another thing that we saw with our testimonials, like one of the recommendations that we making to organizations who do this outreach is, in our testimonial, the audio testimonial, we clipped together some interviews from past Dartmouth work that talked about like their personal experiences. Like, she was a single mother, you know, she was juggling all of this stuff. Her house had all of these specific problems. So those specific elements of storytelling really, like, when people are listening, that's what they hear, that's what they relate to. And that's what makes them think like pay attention, I guess, and hook. And we think that that might be more effective than just being like, you need to get weatherized. It's easy and they come and fix your home. If anyone else has anything else to add, please jump in.
Yeah, just building off what Cindy already mentioned, I think in our initial interviews, we just saw how important organic word of mouth was. And that was really what inspired us to pursue this testimonial content. Like, residents who had heard about weatherization, it wasn't from like a specific flyer or a specific organization. Typically, it was from like a friend or family member who had mentioned it. The cover team drives around in a big truck, and one of the things that people like called out frequently was that they would just see the truck coming around their neighborhood, and that was like how they had been connected. So it's sort of like these small little things that happen more organically that are actually really effective, more so than like the structured outreach that organizations typically pursue.
Thank you. These are such great reminders about the great work that it takes and attention that it takes to do this even better. I'm going to say thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your insights and for sharing the presentation. And I'm going to jump to the part of our agenda that's next, which is public comment, since we like to at least honor the time of public comment on our agenda in case folks have joined specifically for that purpose. So I want to just open the floor and see if there's any members of the public that have anything they want to share or questions they want to ask. Okay, not hearing any, which is totally fine. Again, thanks to our Dartmouth students. Best of luck finishing your semester. And if your year of 2022, you're getting very, very close. So congratulations to you all. So I want to jump back in our agenda around the Climate Council updates. So I know that Jane had to hop off. I think she's back with us. Since there's so much that's happening with council meetings, some task group conversations, and the wrap up of the legislature, I think we thought it's always helpful in these meetings to just do a check-in about things that are going on, decisions that are made, or things that are in the works. And I wondered, Jane or Marion, if either of you wanted to speak from the council perspective, and then we could turn to any of the various task groups or working groups to share any accomplishments or kind of noteworthy updates. And then either could include legislative updates.
Sorry, I'm getting messages from Jane. She's not back at her desk yet. If you want to delay 5 minutes, she can be at her desk to give you updates. May be good to, there are some folks who are working on task groups as who could liaise back to the subcommittee now. So maybe good to shift to those folks and then go back to Jane. If not, I can cover, but she would have slightly more concrete updates than I would.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to hear from some of the task groups first. So Kashka, Kelly, and others that are part of public engagement, is there anything from your the task group efforts that you want to share? Yeah, Kashka.
So with the public engagement task group, we're actually we're working on a lot of the similar things that the Dartmouth students were showing, and like I said, it's something that I was doing with Indra as well, in doing the work for Capstone. It is it's really difficult to do work when you're in such a small bubble, when this is not the full-time employment for anyone. So I think that we are really excited for the new climate office and the new climate person that will be tasked with working on and doing this kind of scope, the scope of work full time, and see where that leads. Currently, David Plum is leading, and CBI is leading us in engaging with organizations, but not only organizations, with trying to put together storyboards on a different side of it, and making sure that there's video translations of documents for the CAP. And please, anyone add to that as well.
I will just add a bit of a council update. So the Climate Council is meeting on Monday next week, and there is an agenda item to think and talk a little bit about public engagement. David and Jane and myself, and really the Just Transitions public engagement task group, work to revise the public engagement strategy that has that three-pronged approach for broad-based public engagement, broader accessibility to the climate action plan, and then direct engagement and outreach to impacted communities. And so I can put a link to that revised public engagement strategy, which is posted for the materials for Monday's meeting, but I'll put a link to that in the chat. And that references a lot of the work that Kashka was speaking to, as well as those components of sort of expanding access to the CAP through story map creation, through translation services, as well as summary of the two broad-based public engagement events that we held at the end of April. So there will be discussion on that and sort of reflection and reintroduction of that public engagement strategy at the council meeting on Monday. And I've put the link in the chat to that strategy for folks.
Great, thanks. Anything else from public engagement? Kelly's shaking her head no. Okay. What about any of the other work groups or task groups that subcommittee members have been participating in? So anything around metrics or transportation, municipal vulnerability index?
I can go ahead just because Virginia isn't here to speak to the climate toolkit work, which is one of those implementation task groups. If you all recall, there's a number of task groups that are working on implementing specific actions from the climate action plan focused on a municipal vulnerability index, climate toolkit, measuring and assessing progress tool. Sorry if this sounds like a repeat for folks, trying to bridge the gap a little bit with the new members as well. And so Virginia is representing the Just Transition Subcommittee on the Climate Toolkit Task Group. She's not here today, and I'm helping lead that effort, so can give a bit of an overview. That task group meets bi-weekly and is really focused on creating a toolkit that acts as a hub of resources from across state government and nonprofit and private sector partners as well, for resources primarily focused on municipalities looking to tackle climate change in their communities. And it will cross the sort of climate sphere from greenhouse gas mitigation actions and activities to adaptation and resilience for communities and carbon sequestration as well. We're working on thinking about how to categorize resources and ensure that they are most helpful and really help increase capacity at the municipal level. We've done some engagement with municipal leaders across the state on what they would be looking for and really what their barriers are in taking climate action at a municipal level, and the number the two top reasons are financial constraints and then capacity to really apply for grants, implement projects, that sort of thing. So we're working on that. We met on Monday and did a good brainstorm of continued public engagement we could do specifically around municipal leaders. But I will say there's a lot of interest from that group to hear about the outcomes from the work that the Public Engagement Task Group is doing and engaging with those organizations that are really embedded in and working in those impacted communities. There's a lot of interest from the Climate Toolkit group on hearing about how we could start to message tools and resources that communities can use to engage with mobile home parks or low-income communities in their areas. So there's a lot of crossover, I think, with the work of the Public Engagement Task Group, and they're looking forward to hearing about how that goes and how that moves forward. In addition to that, we're looking at events that are more focused on municipalities. So A&R Municipal Day, which is happening in late fall, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns Town Fair, town meetings and member meetings of regional planning commission boards, as well as the summit of the Vermont Association of Conservation Commissions, which is in mid-October, to think about engagement around a toolkit and messaging that with municipal leaders and volunteers to really help round that out and start messaging that as a hub of resources for folks to go to when thinking about climate action broadly. So Virginia's involved with that work, but isn't here today to give an update, and looking forward to continuing that.
Thanks, Marian. Kafka.
So I just wanted to I wanted to let you guys know I attended this international speaker series at Champlain College, and there was a few speakers that really stood out to me, and one in particular, she is De La Cruz Koniboyeva. I'm butchering her name, but she works for the Biden administration, and she's an environmental justice practitioner and expert in conflict and communications. And she had been talking about community outreach, and there's a few things that she said that really stood out to me. And she said, as far as doing community outreach to marginalized communities, it has to be, the conversation cannot be around climate. It has to be a specific issue to that community, to those people, specific issues. Keep it local, keep the issues locally specific, and specific in nature as they are, instead of putting it under the umbrella of environmental justice or climate change. So that is something that really stood out to me, and I just wanted to share it with you all.
I could just quickly mention, unless anyone else from the group that met with the Office of Racial Equity, about the equity impact assessment tool and how that may dovetail with the just transition guiding principles and the rubric. Maybe I'll start really quickly. There was a bit of a clarification, I think, from the Office of Racial Equity that they are looking at revamping the equity impact assessment tool, and taking input from the equity liaisons that exist across state government. They reviewed the just transition guiding principles and the rubric, offered us sort of some editing feedback, and some good clarifying questions. They also, I think, acknowledged that they saw that the guiding principles have more of an ecological kind of bent, obviously, since that they were developed as part of the Climate Council. And so really wondering if it would be a better fit as an addendum to the equity impact assessment toolkit, as opposed to a full integration. They also clarified that the equity impact assessment that's used by state agencies is required on all policy and budget proposals, so for sort of new initiatives, but that I think that Susanna Davis mentioned that the objective is that that would get used as a kind of a review for all existing programs as well at some point. So we talked about next steps being that there's members of the Office of Racial Equity for the state of Vermont that would be happy to join this subcommittee meeting at a future meeting. And that I think there was a bit of maybe uncertainty around maybe what the next steps would be. But I know that Claire and Sarah were also there, so I don't know if either of you had additional takeaways from that conversation.
You did a nice job summarizing. Thanks, Ab.
Yep. Sue.
So I just want to make sure I kind of heard there was not really, for good reasons perhaps, an interest in integrating, but rather maybe using an addendum. What would it mean to be an addendum? And what do we think about that? I've just wanted to open the floor a little bit. And I don't know, I have to look at the assessment again, but I felt there was a narrowness of that equity. Maybe it should be called the racial equity assessment, because I didn't feel when I looked at it, it was looking at economic equity in the same way. And maybe ours, it's interesting that ours is more, I guess, environmentally specific, although as I think about it, it doesn't feel that way. Anyway, I'm going to look at mine at it more carefully with that lens. But I guess the question is, what might it mean to be an addendum? At least it's something referenced to me in a state document. That's important. And, you know, it's pretty high aspiration to have it like embraced and utilized. I think one step at a time. I guess that would be my take. Like, let's accept that, but let's ask them to do that. Any other thoughts?
So, yeah, I had a thought. I kind of agree with you, Sue, that I'm not sure what it would mean to be an addendum. And, you know, I sort of wonder the value of like people on this committee with limited time, like putting a lot into that. But I think if S148 gets signed into law, there is that advisory council. And one of the first tasks they have to do is to develop principles. And I think the principles are already developed in the guiding principles. So I think that that avenue would be a good way to get the guiding principles into action if we feel like, oh, maybe this one is not as effective as we'd like.
Thanks for that. Anyone want to talk about S148, the environmental justice bill, and sort of status? I know we're not at the finish line yet. Maybe by this weekend, when the legislature hopefully will conclude their session. Jane?
Well, I think they conclude tonight. So tonight's the last day. The bill has already been passed by both of the committees, both of the houses, the House and the Senate, and it's with Ledge Council right now for a scrub. The scrub means essentially just they can't change any of the language in the bill, but it's really a cleaning up of spelling and basic like grammar components. And this sort of process is actually a weird time in the legislative process where there's not a discrete timeline of when it gets passed off to be printed and delivered to the governor. And so, but that is the next step, is that the bill gets delivered to the governor. And that timeline can be as soon as tonight or in the next few days. And so the governor will then have, once it's delivered to the governor, 5 days to allow to go into law, sign as law, or veto. And I think that is still an open question about what the governor's going to do with this bill. So there is a much better scaling, I think, from a state agency perspective of resources and expectations within this bill. And so it's reasonable to think that he will sign it into law. but it's not clear yet. And so for folks who don't know, will be this equity council that is set up, looking at principles and definitions, and there are positions allocated within it, both the permanent funding of a position that already existed in A&R from half-time to full-time, which was a move to take it from the budget and put it and tie it associated with the EJ bill. And then there are additional positions to consider the work that's needed to be done to stand up the mapping tool and other capacity. And I'm sure Carrie and others can speak to more detail than me, but there are timelines associated with it and reports and rulemaking and lots of stuff. So we should know in the next week.
Jane, I wonder if, I know that we're cutting into our discussion time, but I wondered if there were any really critical council updates that you felt were kind of burning and relevant to share with us.
I really appreciate you giving me the leeway to be, I was listening into the presentation and all of you, sorry to have to step away to shuttle kids. I'll be really brief because I'm excited for Marion to help facilitate the next part of the conversation, which really builds on what you all did at your last meeting with the Jamboard session. But I will say that the council is meeting on Monday. The sort of directive of that meeting is actually around rulemaking. One of the interesting components of the Global Warming Solutions Act was that when the agency goes to act on rules that it is directed to do so by the Climate Action Plan, those rules must be presented and discussed by the Climate Council. There were 2 rules that were put forward in the Climate Action Plan that are called Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Trucks. It's kind of a funny space to introduce this process to the council because under the Clean Air Act, Vermont can either adopt federal standards or adopt what California does in this space. We have no discretion to change these rules. It's an either or, we either adopt as is or don't adopt. And so really the conversation with the council on Monday will be around what those rules do for EVs in Vermont. And the interesting component and overlap in this space is that the GWSA says absolutely nothing about public engagement for the Climate Action Plan, which I find amazing, but there's a really robust section in the GWSA about public engagement around rulemaking. And so rulemaking is a really typically a boring public engagement process where you just offer to have a hearing. Sometimes we don't even have hearings, but rules like this we typically do because the public is interested in transportation. But the GWSA actually speaks to holding statewide public meetings that are targeted at frontline and impacted communities who will be impacted by these rules. And so that will be the conversation with the council a bit about what the public engagement plan and strategy is for rulemaking in this space. So stay tuned and join on Monday if you're interested in that. And we'll certainly be talking about public engagement around the rules with the public engagement task group to ensure we're interpreting it the way we'd like to. The best way, I should say. And then the other components with the council are largely around, I heard Marion already speak to the public engagement conversation, but I will just take it a bit further and say that we'll really try to target what we heard from the public at the public forums and look for direct ways to influence our public engagement strategy, as well as the work of the council in the coming months and years around what we heard from the public with those 2 forums and what we want to do in the future. And then finally, I'll just say that we do plan to provide an update to the council on a legislative summary on Monday to speak to more bills that have been both signed into law and ones that have been vetoed in order to both celebrate the success of the session as well as to speak to the next steps around the clean heat standard being vetoed and that veto being sustained. In order to sort of have a more robust conversation than just about the clean heat standard, we'll present a full breadth of legislative actions that were directly related to Climate Action Plan items on Monday, and then use that to pivot the conversation to work planning with the council. The council is planning to not meet again until September. And then in September, there'll be a robust fall meeting schedule that looks at how to advance addendums to the climate action plan to speak to transportation and biomass, as well as thinks about how to engage in the next biennium with the legislature and what priorities they want to lift up and advance in that space. Carrie, I see your hand, and I'll stop there knowing that there's more to do tonight.
Oh, I was just really interested in when you were saying that the Global Warming Solutions Act kind of says that for rulemaking related to climate or things under the Global Warming Solutions Act, that it would be the state agency's responsibility to do that outreach to frontline and impacted communities. Is that what you said? Okay. So
Yeah.
then I wonder about, like, I think about the clean heat standard, and I think about like this loophole of if the state agency goes to change rules, we're going to be held to a standard to really engage with these communities, right? And that's going to be if S148 passes also. But the legislature doesn't hold themselves to that same standard. So like in the case of the clean heat standard, it's not like, yes, maybe somebody somewhere in different state agencies applied the assessment, the racial equity assessment, but it was reactive. It wasn't proactive. So I don't know, like how we address that in the future as future legislation related to the Global Warming Solutions Act goes through, and it's not actually being vetted by the legislature, and then it's not being vetted by the council, and it's not being vetted by the state agency. It just seems like the accountability, I don't know, like if there's just a lot of ways to get around not doing it.
I hear you on that. And that is an interesting dichotomy with the legislative actions from the plan versus rulemaking and the regulatory actions through rulemaking. I will say that with the clean heat standard, one of the earlier changes to the bill was around, a much longer public engagement period, trying to be respectful of how to engage with communities as they design to the clean heat standard over the next 2 years. I'm not saying it went far enough, but they were attempting to engage with communities around the design of that. And then finally, I'll just say, if you'll notice in our public engagement strategy, and one of the things we really want to focus on when we're thinking about broad-based engagement is trying to anticipate what the legislature might do next session and try to do listening sessions and determine Vermonters' interest to engage in these subjects before the legislature takes them up. One that we've been talking about with Claire and the Public Service Department is that the legislature essentially put aside the renewable energy standard this year, but there is a lot of pressure on the legislature to take up the renewable energy standard from outside sources. And it is a recommendation in the climate action plan. It is not a recommendation for a few years to take up, because we identify that we're sort of good in the electricity sector for now, that other sectors need a lot more work. But we're thinking about listening sessions and maybe a strategy that is able to both engage with stakeholders in that space, but just the general public to say, what are the issues when we're thinking about a renewable energy standard? Equity, siting, land, access, impacts to agricultural land, open space. What are the issues that we should be thinking about? And are we ready to go down the path of thinking about that with the legislature? Or can we use that public engagement to tell the legislature, we need more public engagement, and you don't need to do this as a climate strategy yet, so pause. But we don't know that until we start to do that engagement, and we need to be able to anticipate that with the council and others about what those priorities will be.
Kafka, I see your hand.
I just, oh, sorry, is that me or no?
I think you're all right.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So yes, I think I just want to uphold what Jane was saying, that we have recognized within the task group, the public engagement task group, that basically what's happening with engagement, it has been historically it's reactive, right? So we create something, then we get the public engagement, then we get the input, etc. And what we have found is that this is not going to be, it's just not working. We would ideally like to create a space for public engagement where we are anticipatory, just like Jane was saying. But not only that, in a space where Vermonters feel comfortable and have found the trust within us to be able to take whatever their specific issues are and bring them to the legislature and bring them to the policymakers before the policies take hold and before they're written. So, just changing that dynamic. And I think it's going to be really, really tricky to do that when so many governmental agencies, it doesn't seem like, are on board with this. And I'm just curious to know what they mean with by public engagement of marginalized communities when that's just not right. It's impossible to do within the scope that they're saying that it happens. It's just not. Sorry, I think it's false.
So I wonder if this is a good opportunity for us to transition into thinking about some of the priorities for this subcommittee for the next 6 months. And I just want to bring attention to a couple of the comments in the chat while maybe Marian gets up the document that I know that she's been adjusting since we last sent the version to you, but it really speaks to some of the comments about the Environmental Justice Bill S-148, both referencing the incorporation of the guiding principles into both the creation of the Advisory Council and the Interagency Committee that would ideally be created if that bill were to pass. And then Sarah's comment and feedback from from Sue about not being done yet with the conversation around the equity impact assessment and alignment with the just transition principles and rubric. That will come back to that conversation maybe after we see what final bills are passed and where we are with the EJ bill. So with that, Marian, how does it feel to turn over to you to kind of maybe direct us to this updated priority document and see where we might want to put some energy in the next few months?
Yeah, thanks, Abby. Feels great and feels like it will be a good focus for the conversation we were just having around all of these priorities that are important for us to lift up and consider, and to sort of view those through the lens of your capacity as a subcommittee, task group capacity, staff capacity, and what we want to prioritize over the next 6 months. So I'm going to pull up this document. I will say it may be a little fast moving for new folks who are just joining. Please feel free to ask questions to help clarify anything. I will say this activity or this conversation we're having is building off of our last meeting, where we as a group worked through a collaborative tool called a Jamboard to start identifying concrete actions that this subcommittee would like to focus and work on through 3 broad buckets: through the Climate Council's work through state government, and then work potentially with the legislature. I will put if I can find it, the link in the chat to this document, which is saved online with this meeting. Abby said it was also sent out with your agenda earlier. We made 2 small changes, but it's generally the same. We're going to focus on the table at the top, but before I jump into that, I just want to bring your attention to how it's sort of grouped as notes underneath. So what I did is took all of the comments that we put into the Jamboard, put those verbatim into this document, and then took a summary of the conversation that we had, as well as the conversation that was robust happening in the chat, and categorized that into those 3 broad areas. And using sort of a focus on action steps, so really concrete actions that this group may want to take and move forward in the next couple of months, group those into 3 categories into this table. So encourage you all to take a look at that, at the version that's online. All of the detailed notes from that last session are in this Word document. What I'm actually going to do is shift to the same version that has a little bit more columns in a table. And so what we'd like to do, and we'll walk through this, try and provide some background detail for the new members here as well. I'll hand it over to Jane to speak just a little bit to capacity constraints. But if we can today in the next 15 minutes, and maybe it needs to bleed over into our next meeting, but hoping we can start to take a look at what really carried forward and carried up in our conversation last time. What is work that is already ongoing or happening? So these highlights are new for you all. If you haven't looked at the document since last time, Jane and I went through and tried to highlight those specific actions that are already happening in some capacity, either through state employee, staff support, through work of the Just Transition Subcommittee, the work of the council, or work of a specific task group. If something's not highlighted, we weren't able to articulate that that work is already happening. And so what we need to do today is understanding capacity of this group, of the council, and of staff, is determine whether there are specific things in here that are not highlighted that this group thinks are important to raise up, and how do we want to do that? Who's going to take the lead on it? How do we work through that with our limited capacity and start attaching timeframes to that so we can build out a work plan based on the actions that you all lifted up as a group? So before I go through these, Jane, do you want to speak just a little bit to sort of capacity and things we should keep in mind as we go through this conversation?
Yeah, thanks so much, Marianne. That was a great job. And I guess I want to start by saying and acknowledging that what is shown as highlighted is an impressive body of work. So as we go through this process, I also want to say that if there isn't added capacity through the Just Transition Subcommittee, that's okay. That I think that the work that you did last week to highlight these priorities, and for us now to highlight and try to illustrate how they're being carried forward right now, is impressive in and of itself. I also just want to suggest that right now we are sort of at limited bandwidth within our agency to help lift up and support unhighlighted components of this work plan, but that's finite. Like, I do expect in the coming months, as we transition and lift up the Climate Action Office in the Agency of Natural Resources, I think I've alluded this to all of you, our first priority in that office is to hire somebody who will help lead the community engagement work with the council and the public engagement strategy on behalf of the Climate Action Plan. And that could mean picking up and working very closely with the Just Transitions Subcommittee to carry forward more of these priorities. So I do think that what we're doing is really great, and we have some contractual support to carry that work forward in the coming months. And the work that you're doing now is also laying the groundwork for this new person, new capacity also in the fall to really pick up and run with it. So appreciate that there's also added capacity here on the subcommittee, and it's good to walk through these priorities, see where they're being carried out, and think about where we might be able to add and complement.
Great. So I'm going to go through what was called out as specific action items, and we can speak, or folks, we can all jump in to speak a little bit to how either the highlighted items are moving forward and what that's looking like in terms of timeline, or if there's interest from the subcommittee members to really pick up some of these unhighlighted items. Considering we've added 6 new members to the subcommittee, there may be added capacity here, but also thinking about your work as a group and how do you want to stay focused and sort of work towards concrete goals and actions in the next 6 months or so. So let's start with the council's work. And again, this is all was filtered up from the conversation we had last month with the use of the Jamboard, the chat, and the and just dialogue and conversation. And you should be able to reference all of that in that Word document that I linked for you all. So the first item, and I'll try my best to explain these for folks who may be newer to this content. The first item that came up that was important for us to consider as an action item was to continue to monitor the work of the Municipal Vulnerability Index, the environmental justice mapping tool that's included in S148 that we were just speaking to, the environmental justice bill, to ensure that equity is considered in the metrics and the data, and include engagement with Rejoice on their EJ mapping work. This work is underway. I think there's members of the Just Transition Subcommittee who are working with the Municipal Vulnerability Index Task Group. So a quick refresher for folks, we have subcommittees from the council, and there are task groups under subcommittees that are working sort of cross-collaborating and cross-subcommittees to move forward action items from the Climate Action Plan. So they're really focused on specific implementation action. So when we refer to task group, it's really a specific action that's being implemented with help from subcommittee members across the work of the council. Any questions about this or updates on this? I don't think we actually got an update from you, Jane, on the Municipal Vulnerability Index, and she's just left. So maybe we'll wait for a moment to fill in on that. I know that she's working on finalizing that RFP. Ran into a couple of additional comments from folks, but is working to get that finalized and up to think about how equity is included in that metric. And then I think knowing the outcome of S148 will inform sort of the second half of this bullet here. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, so many buttons. I'm recognizing that we're nearing the end of time today, and there's a lot to discuss here. And so I just want to lift up something that I see missing in this, and maybe I'm just not understanding where it's meant to be captured. That I actually did, and unfortunately I had to miss the last meeting, but I did see it in the Jamboard discussion, this piece that we have discussed regularly around metrics and around ensuring that there are equity metrics in the way that we're assessing the progress towards achieving the goals of the Climate Council. And I don't see that represented here. And so I'm wondering if you can point out where it is or where we intend to put that piece. And I hope it doesn't feel too forthright to say that I think that we've discussed it in the past and come to consensus that that's an important part of the work that we want to see move forward. So even though I saw it in the discussion from last week, so I'm assuming it's meant to be included here, but I may have missed something about why it's not or where it's been lumped in.
Sure, thanks for catching that. It may just have been an oversight on my part and how things were worded. I think part of it is included in this the bucket of the work of the Municipal Vulnerability Index and the EJ mapping tool to consider that equity is in the metrics and the data that's included in that work. You're right, I think there is maybe a one step further of actually tracking and creating those metrics. And I think speaks a little bit to this one, which we may just want to expand upon further, which is get a baseline understanding for community engagement data, which is one component of metrics that we had in that conversation. Intersecting with public engagement, metrics task group. So it is called out here. It may not be as explicit as it should be. So I think we could fill it out here. I will say that if it's something we have to add here, we didn't tag it to a specific lead. So that's a conversation we should have, and maybe that's a good conversation to have for today.
Yeah, and if I can just briefly say, yes, we talked about public engagement being one of those metrics, but that's not the only way that we're looking at it. And the vulnerability map is also slightly different than I think what we've been discussing. So, and maybe it's just I don't understand the ultimate outcome of that, but I don't want to lose sight of this piece. So thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Claire, and then Jane.
Oh yeah, I was just going to add to what Sarah said. And I also wasn't here at the last meeting, so I apologize. But we had that small group that talked about metrics, and that was Sarah, myself, Abby, Virginie, Kashka, I think Marion and Jane. And the three kind of outcomes were one, feeding in, that I remember, were feeding into the monitoring and assessment tool. Part of it was, I think, related to the sort of community needs assessment that Virginie has mentioned, and thinking generally about baseline data. But there was, I think what I similarly wasn't seeing that Sarah mentioned was there seemed to be a interest in developing metrics, like a set of metrics that could, for example, flow from the principals themselves. And that wasn't necessarily a task group outside of the subcommittee. It was just our interest in our little group continuing that conversation. And of course, if there are new subcommittee members interested in that, that would be helpful. And I had volunteered to reconvene that group. We didn't really have a next action item, and it slipped through the cracks for me in the last couple of weeks, but I am so happy to participate. I do have limited bandwidth, I'll just say, but I'm happy to nudge it forward if there's still interest in others who are wanting to be engaged in that.
Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, so yes, and so I think I like that you started to move that to a new cell, and I actually really do think it's a merging of the new cell you're creating and the cell below, because I thought the community engagement data was in fact one of the components of what we would think about when we were thinking about metrics to consider how we're doing, and the questions that Carrie just put in the chat. And I do think it's about, like, one group to use it might be the public engagement group, but it's very much about the measuring and assessing progress tool. And that feels like a gap to me that we don't have that here, because we're definitely thinking about what the metrics will be to include in the measuring and assessing progress tool around this.
Okay, so I'm going to capture this in a new item here.
Yeah, energy bills and all that, yeah.
So it'll include
just,
up.
While I have,
oh, go ahead.
It's okay, go ahead. I had one other point, but I'll do it after.
Well, so I just want to make sure I'm capturing all of the points that are made here. So we're going to include sort of creating and tracking equity metrics. You're right, we did discuss sort of the use of that beyond just one specific tool, that it could be used to inform other efforts across state government as a reference point for here's what to think about when you're thinking about metrics. Sarah or Claire, remind me what were the other main pieces that we were thinking about beyond just community engagement baseline data for that?
Well, I think if I remember right, we can table this to a future meeting. I'll defer to my chairs, but I think we were talking about the Climate Council as a whole is going to be tracking metrics in terms of how well we're doing. And we were talking about what are the things that we can include that are related to equity that need to be a part of that dashboard, or the way that we as a whole are looking, not just like our own, just transition subcommittee has their special little metrics they're looking at, but like everybody needs to be looking at these metrics. So we were talking about energy burden, we were talking about engagement, and then I think, and Kashka and others, correct me if I'm wrong, I think where we got in that first initial conversation was really some thoughts around process that we wanted to talk with, sorry, A&R, not the Climate Council, I'm sorry, but I think just that we wanted to engage others in that conversation and needed to not just, that we had some thoughts around process and how we needed to move forward that work, and we needed to come back and reconvene, but that's as far as we got.
And just to add, it seemed like the other next step was beginning to look at other tools. Like we had looked at the tool in Colorado, and there's maybe this would be like the next meeting, which I'm happy to help schedule before our next subcommittee meeting if there's interest, would be to have folks pull in examples of either dashboards or metrics so that we could start seeing what others are doing in this space and thinking how that would apply to our own work here. And I, of course, have the list of folks who were involved, but if there are new folks on the subcommittee or others who weren't involved who are now, your interest is piqued, the more the merrier, I think.
Yeah, I think just because we are at time, 2 points that may be good takeaways from this meeting is one, are there any new members or folks who are interested in being engaged in that work and conversation around equity, creating equity metrics, how we track them, and how that can be folded into the work of the council? And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is the other sort of blue highlight that we have here is we had talked at our last meeting about wanting representation from the Just Transition Subcommittee on Transportation and Biomass task groups, but wanted to put a pin in it until new members joined to see if there were folks who were interested in engaging in that space, because I don't think we had anyone from old members engaged in that work. So I think now would be, we can speak to that more at our next meeting, but if that's piquing anyone's interest as well, maybe good to get that information so we can start sharing task group meetings.
I think that there are new members. I just want to say, I think we have new members interested. How can new members interested present, how should they become involved is, I guess, the question. If you're a new member and you want to be involved, do people send an email? Do you just want them to mention it in the chat right now before we go?
I am happy to send out an email to this whole group, assuming I have everyone's email, and just if folks respond directly to me and only me, and then if I already have your name, don't worry about that, but new folks, let me know. And I saw Sebi and also Carrie, so you don't have to email me because I have you on my list.
And just sorry that I kept interrupting you, Sue, but I just want to highlight
that the transportation and bio task groups are a little different, just so everybody, the new members know this. They're working on concrete recommendations as an addendum to the climate action plan for the council to consider this fall. And we really, Chris Campany, who's not here tonight, but a member of the subcommittee, is going to transportation, but welcome another member to participate there. And a biomass task group, which has a lot of equity concerns and interests and opportunities, is not currently being staffed by anybody on this subcommittee. So that meets bi-weekly on Wednesday mornings from 8:30 to 10, and would really welcome increased participation from the subcommittee on that group.
Okay,
and I'm facilitating that one, so it can help orient anybody who's interested.
So yeah, Jane, I just wanted to say, so if there are folks that are interested in either biomass or transportation where we haven't had consistent, I mean, Ross has been attending transportation, but we haven't had sufficient additional representation in either of those conversations. Does it make sense for them to reach out to you to find out when those meetings are happening and how to get connected? Okay, Jane is nodding yes. So Kashka, I see that your hand is raised. I know we're at 6:02, but I want to make sure we hear your last words.
Oh, so long ago. I just wanted to talk to the metrics and what Sarah and Claire, I think, had been talking about. I think we had also discussed how the metrics would be helpful in identifying different gaps within different programs from different agencies and different not companies, different organizations. So identifying those gaps and just making sure that we understand where these programs could better benefit the people that they're intended for, et cetera, et cetera. So that was another intention of the data and the metrics that I just wanted to point out that we had spoken to. Thanks.
Thank you, Kashka, and thanks for being patient. So thanks everybody for staying a few minutes over. I think, Marion, you got us started in this exercise of developing our work plan and thinking about how the work of this subcommittee joins with the other efforts of the council. I love that we have additional capacity, and I think there is real expertise within this subcommittee to work on some of the other topics and areas and add more voices to the work that's already ongoing. And I think that one of our takeaways and assignments maybe for next week will be that we'll get even closer to developing a work plan and thinking about whether that's even an exercise that we do as a kind of a pull it out activity of a subgroup to make sure we have real clarity of where we're focusing time and attention going forward. So it's great to have such a dynamic group. Hopefully we'll have more opportunity for discussion and dialogue next time. This was a really heavy presentation-based meeting, so thanks for being patient for 2 hours and doing lots of listening and learning.
I want to say a special thank you and farewell to Iris, which we did get a minute to hear from her, but we were so excited for you and wishing you the best, and we'll miss you.
Yeah, thank you all for all your work, and I'm ready for a break, but I'm so thankful for all of you that are continuing on to do this. So yeah.
Thanks, Iris.
I really love that Columbia is a break.
Yeah.
Could be working her butt off.
And their gain for sure. Okay, see you on June 16th, if not for a task group meeting before.
Thank you, Abby.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everyone.